is Paul Young. Welcome to SkyWatch.
Good evening and welcome to SkyWatch. We're at TIVAS, that's Tiverton Astronomy Society at Blundell's School, and I've got John Parrott with me this evening. Hi, John.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah, and apparently we're going to dive back to, cast our minds back to the I think it was around 1970, wasn't it?
Yeah,
with the Apollo 13 mission.
13, yeah, about 1972.
Yeah, so going back earlier on, I mean, 69 was the moon landing, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah. 69 was the moon landing of Apollo 11, and then you had the other Apollo missions as well. And this one, Apollo 13, was going to be the major one that was going to land precisely in the Frau Maurer Heights, or mountains.
Okay, so it was set to land on the moon. That was the main part of the mission.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it launched, and as people know, it was a disaster, wasn't it? Really, but they came back, didn't they? So I don't know. Do you want to take us from takeoff roughly, or how do you want to start?
They took off in 1972. I can't remember the month at the present moment, but on the way to the moon, around about 3 to 4 days into it, they were doing their general checks through. And the home base, as they call it, on Earth, and said to them, could they stir the cryo tanks? And what these are basically fuel cells. And they got liquid hydrogen, liquid helium inside, and they need stirring every now and again. And what they didn't know was that inside, before the launch of the Apollo, they normally stir them up again. And unknown to them at the time, there was an actual piece of the wiring plastic came off the covering, and it melted apparently when they did the test, and they didn't know this. And usually on the morning beforehand they go through all these tests again just to make sure that everything's working, and they decided to skip this particular test, unfortunately. On Apollo 12 they did the same thing, but they did do the test and they found that there's something wrong with it. So why they didn't check it this time, I don't know. But about 50 odd hours into it, they were told to stir the cryo tanks, which Mr. Schweikert did. And as he did so, there was a massive explosion. And basically it blew half the side of the spacecraft out, or the command module. And they suddenly realised, because the ship was going all over the place, it must have been about 5 to 10 minutes trying to contain the swerving and whatever it was during the time, but basically it wasn't on course. And I think they took about half an hour to stabilise the two crafts themselves and assess what was going on. And they suddenly realised that all the oxygen tanks they had on the command module were being drained, because you hear the famous expression, Houston, we have a problem, which wasn't Jim Love at the time, it was the other guy, which I can see his name is now.
That's where that came from, really, that saying at that point, was it?
Jack Schweikert said it first, and then about a few minutes later Jim Lovell comes through. He said, Houston, we have got a problem. And basically they were looking on the telemetry on Earth, and they said there's something disastrously wrong here, this doesn't make sense. And it took them several minutes to sort that out, and in the meantime the oxygen was being depleted. As Jim Lovell said to Earth, he says, I'm seeing something venting into space, and basically it was their oxygen. And they could see their main buses, the amps and fuel and reserves, all literally falling down on the gauges. And I think they said, right, hang on, we'll sort all this out. And Glyn Lumley, who's in command of all the ground base, turned and said, okay, let's settle down, sort this out, sort the problem. And within a few minutes, they actually suddenly realised that the command module and the service module were going to be dead within minutes. So they turned and said, right, how fast will it take you to fire up the LEM, which is the lunar module? And they said, well, by the book, normally about half an hour to an hour. It's just you've got 5 minutes. And they literally had to do everything in that 5 minutes to get it done.
So the LEM had its own oxygen supply, did it?
Oh, yeah. Well, it had to have its own oxygen supply because basically they would land on the moon and they were going to be there for 2-3 days. And it was only designed for 2 people. So basically what happened then was that they all scrambled into the lunar module. They couldn't close the hatch down, the command module, so they had to leave it there. But they had to power it down, basically, to save as much power in the batteries as possible. And that's basically what happened, really. And what they were going to try and do was to bring them back on a fast return trip, if they could. But one of the mathematician guys there turned and says, no, he said, if you do that, he said, you'll burn up more fuel for one. He said, just go on this lunar trajectory you're on now. He said, which will save fuel. The moon will grab both craft, swing it around the moon and bring it back again. So that it's gravitational, it could actually do it. And that's basically what they did. Consumables, they were okay, but it was just heat. They had to literally, by the time they got to the moon, they had to switch everything off and go with the bare essentials, especially the radio and etc. like that, and water. They had to ration. By the time they got around the other side of the moon, the food was starting to freeze because it was so cold. And what they were concerned about basically was all the electronics in the command module. And because basically it was frozen, it was getting more and more moisture because of the air they were exhaling. So where one particular part come into that was the scrubbers on the lunar module, because they were designed for 2 people, plus the fact they were cylinders. Or in the command module, they were square, which is where this guy on the surface suddenly realised, hang on a minute, I've got to work out how to do this, but also get them to do it in space with whatever they've got. So basically, they did that with a plastic bag, a rip-off of one of the books, some gaffer tape, which they carry with them anyway. And they were then read out what to do, how to do it. One had to take the sock off to cover it over the thing, but they actually worked out at the same time as the astronauts turned around and said, we haven't got enough oxygen here, we need to recycle it and scrub it. And he said, yeah, that's already been sorted. But if you ever look at the film, Apollo 13, nobody thinks about it. But in reality, they did. They already knew about that. Which is why Jim Lovell said that the film was okay, but it was too highlighted. They were making too much out of it. He says, where they said we were going to bounce off the walls if we got angry and stuff like that. He said, none of that happened. He said, we're trained to do this sort of thing and work out situations, which is what they did basically.
And I don't know if you know, John, how long from when it actually happened to when they kind of repaired it and got into the LEM and it was all functional.
Yeah.
What sort of time is that? Was that days? Was that hours? Or would you know?
When they powered up the LEM, it took them around about 15 minutes. So basically, it was just 15 minutes to get into the LEM. When they was travelling around the moon back towards Earth's trajectory, they was on the people who were doing the mathematicians working out the oxygen levels and how much oxygen was left in it, and they worked out that if they didn't switch off a lot of the consumables they were using, they would be dead before about 20-30 hours before they even got to Earth. So basically, they had to switch off everything down, and use the bare minimum they could, just basic radio. And when they were doing the course corrections, the ground worked that out, and then she's got to do a burn for such and such a time. Do you think the engines will work? And they had to use the LEM's engines, which you can't switch off, or so they thought. So basically, what they did was they turned around and they had to use the Apollo service module engine, because that you can switch on and switch off. And they weren't too sure if it'd work. They just had to literally go by luck. But lucky enough, it did work. And he got their course corrections. When they entered towards Earth's atmosphere, they had to literally let the service module go, So the command module and the LEM were still attached. When they were getting into trajectory to enter the Earth's atmosphere, they were travelling about 25,000 miles an hour. So they had to get into the right trajectory on that. They were a little bit deeper than what they thought, actually. You know, when they were coming in, then they had to let the LEM go. And you hear Fred Hayes say, you know, well, thanks to your Odyssey, you know, you were our lifesaver, basically. And when they entered the Earth's atmosphere, the one thing they were worried about is because they saw the damage, they took photographs of the command module itself, and they could see the damage. All one side, so one part was literally ripped to pieces, basically, blew out complete. And they were worried about the actual heat shield, whether that was loose or not. And eventually they came through the atmosphere. About 4.5 minutes later, because they actually skimmed the Earth itself a bit, first of all, before going into, so they were slightly longer coming through the atmosphere than what everyone expected. And then the next thing they were worried about was whether the parachute was open, whether the explosives were frozen. Lucky enough they weren't. And eventually they actually did land safely, you know, after that. So they were very lucky to get back, very lucky.
So that was, what, about a week, was it, or so?
It's around about 4 days altogether. 4 days? Yeah, 4 days altogether, yeah.
Longest 4 days of their lives.
I would think so. The longest 4 days of anyone's life, I think, really. But, you know, they're well trained. They do different scenarios. But that was the one scenario they hadn't planned for, because they didn't think it was going to happen.
Ever going to happen?
No, neither. But I think, was it James Lovell? He was going to go to the moon, but his wife said, no, not anymore. So he had to step back. But originally, they were the crew, or prime crew, for Apollo 14. And the only reason why they were swapped, because the commander of Apollo 13 at the time was Alan Shepard, and he got an ear infection. So basically, he couldn't fly. The other thing was, which Jim Lovell didn't like, especially about the medical staff, is that they swapped Schweigert for another astronaut. But he was swapped over for this other guy, but apparently he was supposed to have been exposed to measles, but in the end he didn't have the measles.
Thank you very much. So, well, everybody listening to TCR, thanks very much, John, for that, and keep listening for future updates in the sky and astronomy. Thanks then, John. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.